Summit of Shadows. In 6 days, the leaders of 20 nations will gather in one location. Presidents, prime ministers, heads of state representing over 3 billion people. They will discuss climate agreements, economic partnerships, and international security. The world's media will broadcast every handshake, every speech, every carefully choreographed moment of diplomatic theater. What the cameras will not show is the army of security personnel surrounding the venue. What the journalists will not report is the intelligence operation that prevented the deadliest terrorist attack in modern history. What the public will never know is how close civilization came to catastrophe. This is Operation Iron Shield. This is the story of how secret elites stopped a coordinated assassination plot that would have killed 20 world leaders and plunged the planet into chaos. The first warning came from an unlikely source. A low-level informant embedded in a European extremist network reported unusual activity. Money was moving through channels typically used for small-scale operations, but the amounts were unprecedented. Communications referenced a great cleansing scheduled for a specific date. The date coincided with the Global Leadership Summit scheduled to take place in a European capital. Intelligence analysts initially assessed the threat as aspirational rather than operational. Extremist groups frequently discussed attacks on high-profile events without possessing the capability to execute them. The informant's network had never demonstrated capacity for operations beyond vandalism and minor violence. But something about this intelligence felt different. The communications showed unusual operational security. The financial flows were sophisticated, and references to international coordination suggested connections beyond the informant's immediate network. Secret Elite activated enhanced monitoring protocols. Within 72 hours, Signals Intelligence detected related communications across 4 continents. Separate extremist networks in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia were discussing the same timeline. They used different languages, different platforms, and different operational concepts, but they shared one common element. They were all planning to strike on the same day. The realization transformed the threat assessment from aspirational to existential. Someone had coordinated extremist networks that had never previously collaborated. Someone had provided financing that exceeded any previous operation. Someone had planned an attack of unprecedented scope, and Secret Elite had less than 2 weeks to stop it. The task force assembled within 24 hours. Representatives from 18 nations gathered at a classified coordination center. Intelligence directors, counterterrorism commanders, protective security chiefs, and diplomatic liaisons confronted a threat matrix that defied conventional analysis. The summit would bring together the leaders of the world's most powerful nations. The venue had been selected for its security characteristics. The protective detail would include thousands of personnel from multiple agencies. Every conventional precaution was being implemented. But the intelligence suggested the attackers knew all of this. They had planned accordingly. The initial intelligence picture revealed multiple attack vectors being developed simultaneously. In Eastern Europe, a cell was acquiring military-grade explosives. The quantities suggested vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices capable of penetrating security perimeters. The cell had connections to organized crime networks with experience in weapons trafficking. In the Middle East, a network was recruiting operatives with specific skill sets: former military personnel, individuals with demolitions training, people willing to die for their cause. The recruitment pattern suggested a complex assault requiring trained fighters. In Southeast Asia, a technical cell was developing electronic warfare capabilities, signal jamming equipment, drone control systems, countermeasures designed to defeat security technologies. The sophistication indicated state-level technical support. In North America, a logistics operation was coordinating travel documentation, authentic passports from multiple countries, cover identities that would withstand scrutiny, travel itineraries designed to avoid detection algorithms. Each component was dangerous individually. Together, they represented an attack capability that could overwhelm even the most robust security. But the most disturbing intelligence concerned the attack's ultimate sponsor. Financial tracking revealed that all 4 cells received funding through a common source. The money flowed through layers of shell companies, cryptocurrency exchanges, and informal value transfer systems. But persistent analysis traced the funds to accounts controlled by a rogue intelligence operative. A former high-ranking officer in a major intelligence service had gone dark 3 years earlier. He had taken with him knowledge of security protocols, counterterrorism procedures, and protective detail operations. He understood exactly how world leaders were protected, and he was using that knowledge to plan their assassination. He was known in intelligence circles only as the Architect. The Architect had reportedly become radicalized after his daughter was killed in a military operation he had helped plan. He blamed the world leaders who had authorized the strike. He blamed the system that had used him as an instrument. He blamed everyone except himself. His revenge would be biblical in scale. Think about what was being planned. 20 world leaders eliminated simultaneously. The power vacuum would destabilize every major government. Financial markets would collapse. Military forces would mobilize without clear command authority. Nuclear powers would enter heightened alert status without leaders to make decisions. The chaos would claim more lives than the attack itself. Wars could ignite. Economies could fail. Societies could fracture along lines that had been carefully managed for decades. This was not terrorism seeking political change. This was terrorism seeking civilizational collapse. Secret Elite began the most intensive intelligence operation in its history. Every communications channel associated with the identified cells was monitored continuously. Financial tracking followed every transaction, no matter how small. Human intelligence assets were activated across 4 continents. Satellite surveillance covered every location where attack preparations might occur. The challenge was unprecedented. The cells operated with strict compartmentalization. Each component knew only its own role. The Architect communicated through cutouts and dead drops that changed daily. Traditional intelligence methods were proving insufficient. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A technical analyst noticed patterns in the electronic warfare cell's procurement activities. They were acquiring components that could only be useful against specific security systems, systems that would be deployed at the summit venue, systems whose specifications were classified. Someone had provided the attackers with detailed technical intelligence about summit security. The realization sent shockwaves through the task force. There was a mole. Someone with access to summit security planning was feeding information to the terrorists. Every briefing, every deployment plan, every contingency protocol might be compromised. Secret Elite implemented immediate compartmentalization. Different versions of security plans were distributed to different personnel, each containing unique identifying elements. If information leaked, analysts could trace which version had been compromised. Within 48 hours, they had their answer. A mid-level security coordinator in the Summit Planning Office had been in contact with an unknown handler for 7 months. He had provided comprehensive information about protective details, venue security, communication systems, and emergency protocols. In exchange, he had received payments totaling over $2 million. He did not know he was helping to plan an assassination. He believed he was selling information to a competing intelligence service engaged in routine espionage. He had convinced himself that his actions were harmless. His arrest provided the first direct connection to the Architect's network. Under interrogation, the coordinator revealed his handler's communication methods. Secret Elite technical teams exploited these methods to gain access to a portion of the Architect's communication network. The intelligence was fragmentary, but crucial. The attack plan was more sophisticated than initial assessment suggested. The assault would occur in 3 phases. First, electronic warfare would disable communication and surveillance systems surrounding the summit venue. Protective details would lose coordination capability. Emergency response would be compromised. Second, vehicle-borne explosives would breach the outer security perimeter. The chaos would draw response resources away from the primary venue. Security would believe they were responding to the main attack. Third, an assault team would penetrate the venue through a service entrance that security planning had assessed as low risk. The attackers would reach the summit chamber before protective details could respond. The plan exploited every weakness in conventional security doctrine. It was designed by someone who had spent decades developing that doctrine. Secret Elite had 5 days to neutralize the threat. The decision was made to allow the summit to proceed. Cancellation would alert the network that their operation was compromised. The cells would disperse, regroup, and strike at a future opportunity when intelligence coverage might be less complete. Better to maintain the appearance of normalcy while systematically dismantling the attack infrastructure. Operations began immediately across 4 continents. In Eastern Europe, surveillance teams tracked the explosive cell to a warehouse outside a major city. The facility contained 3 vehicles being converted into massive bombs. Each vehicle was packed with military-grade explosives sufficient to destroy a city block. Secret Elite coordinated with local special operations forces for a simultaneous assault. The operation required precision timing. The explosives were unstable. A firefight inside the warehouse could trigger detonation. At 0300 hours local time, teams breached the facility from multiple entry points. Snipers eliminated armed guards before they could react. The cell members were neutralized within 4 minutes. Bomb disposal teams secured the vehicles. 11 individuals were arrested. The explosive capability was eliminated. In the Middle East, the assault team cell presented different challenges. The operatives were dispersed across multiple locations. They maintained strict operational security. Several had surveillance detection training that made physical observation difficult. Secret Elite implemented a coordinated disruption operation. Immigration databases were quietly updated to flag the operatives' travel documents. Banking systems received instructions to freeze associated accounts. Communication providers received legal orders to intercept specific numbers. When the operatives attempted to travel to Europe for the attack, they discovered their documents were flagged. Their funds were frozen, and their communications were monitored. 17 individuals were arrested at airports across 6 countries. The assault capability was eliminated. In Southeast Asia, the technical cell required specialized intervention. The electronic warfare equipment they had assembled could be dangerous in untrained hands. The facility where they worked contained sensitive components that required careful handling, and several cell members had training that made them dangerous in close combat. Secret Elite deployed technical specialists alongside assault teams. The operation targeted the facility during a period when satellite intelligence confirmed all key personnel were present. The breach was executed with overwhelming force. Cell members were neutralized before they could activate countermeasures or destroy equipment. The electronic warfare capability was seized intact, providing intelligence about the technology's capabilities and limitations. 9 individuals were arrested. Secret Elite technical teams spent days analyzing the seized equipment. They discovered it was more sophisticated than initial assessments suggested. It could have disabled not just Summit security systems, but emergency services across the entire host city. The attack would have killed not just the world leaders, but potentially thousands of civilians who would have been unable to summon help. In North America, the logistics cell operation revealed the true scope of the network. The cell had prepared documentation for over 40 operatives. Travel itineraries showed routes from multiple origin countries converging on Europe in the days before the summit. Accommodations had been arranged. Transportation had been coordinated. Every detail of moving an attack force into position had been planned. Arrests were coordinated across 3 countries simultaneously. 14 individuals were taken into custody. Document forging equipment was seized. Communication devices revealed connections to cells that had not yet been identified. The intelligence enabled expansion of operations to previously unknown network components. With 4 days remaining before the summit, the attack infrastructure had been largely dismantled, but the architect himself remained at large. Intelligence indicated he was monitoring the operation from a location in a neutral country. He had observed the progressive elimination of his network. He understood that his plan had been compromised, and intercepts suggested he was implementing a contingency. The architect had prepared for the possibility of failure. His contingency was simpler than the primary plan, but potentially just as devastating. He had recruited a single operative who had not been part of any identified cell. This operative had clean documentation, no extremist connections, and a legitimate reason to be near the summit venue. The operative carried a biological agent capable of causing mass casualties. The agent was not intended to kill the world leaders directly. It was intended to infect attendees at a public event associated with the summit. The incubation period would allow infected individuals to travel home before symptoms appeared. The disease would spread globally before health systems recognized the outbreak. The world leaders would not die in the attack. They would die in the pandemic that followed. Secret Elite had 72 hours to identify and neutralize a single individual among millions in a major European city. The task force implemented emergency protocols. Every piece of intelligence was reanalyzed for references to biological capabilities. Medical supply chains were monitored for unusual acquisitions. Airport surveillance was enhanced to detect individuals exhibiting signs of biological agent handling. The breakthrough came from financial intelligence. The architect's funds had been frozen, but analysis of historical transactions revealed a payment to a medical research supplier 8 months earlier. The supplier had sold cultures that could be weaponized by someone with advanced training. Cross-referencing the purchase with personnel records at research institutions revealed a single individual whose profile matched the threat parameters, a researcher with access to containment facilities, a recent convert to extremist ideology, a travel history that showed visits to regions where the architect was known to operate. The operative was identified with 36 hours remaining. Surveillance teams located the individual at a hotel near the summit venue. The room contained materials consistent with biological agent preparation. The operative was planning to release the agent at a public reception scheduled for the evening before the summit's main sessions. The arrest required extraordinary precautions. Biological containment teams supported the tactical operation. The operative was neutralized before they could deploy the agent. Containment protocols prevented any release. The biological weapon was secured for disposal. But the operation was not complete. The architect understood his contingency had failed. Intercepts indicated he was preparing to flee to a country without extradition arrangements. If he escaped, he would rebuild his network. He would plan another attack. He would never stop until he achieved his revenge. Secret Elite coordinated with the host nation's intelligence service for an extraordinary rendition operation. The architect was located at a private residence in a neutral capital. He had security personnel, escape plans, and connections that he believed would protect him. He had underestimated international resolve. At precisely the moment when summit leaders were gathering for their first session, special operations teams breached the architect's residence. His security was overwhelmed. His escape routes were blocked. The man who had planned to murder 20 world leaders was taken into custody. His computers contained evidence of the entire operation: communications with cells, financial records, technical specifications, alternative target lists for future attacks. The intelligence would enable counterterrorism operations for years to come. Consider what was prevented. 20 world leaders survived to continue governing their nations. The summit proceeded without incident. Agreements were signed. Partnerships were formed. The business of international cooperation continued. The explosive attacks would have killed not just the leaders, but hundreds of security personnel, staff, and civilians in the vicinity. Families would have been destroyed. Nations would have been traumatized. The biological attack would have caused a pandemic affecting millions. Health systems would have been overwhelmed. Economies would have collapsed. The death toll could have reached into the hundreds of thousands. The global chaos following leadership decapitation would have claimed countless additional lives. Military confrontations, economic collapse, social breakdown. The cascade effects were almost incalculable. Instead, none of this happened. The summit concluded successfully. World leaders returned home to continue their work. The international system continued functioning. The public never knew how close catastrophe had come. 67 individuals were arrested across 12 countries. The charges include terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder, weapons trafficking, and biological weapons violations. The evidence is overwhelming. The architect faces prosecution at the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. The planned attack would have constituted an assault on global civilization itself. His trial will establish precedents for prosecuting terrorism aimed at international governance. Secret Elite operates in shadows so that others can live in light. The world leaders who gathered at the summit never knew the full scope of the threat they faced. They trusted that someone was protecting them. That trust was not misplaced. The citizens who elected those leaders never knew how close they came to losing their governments. They continued their daily lives, unaware that the stability they took for granted had nearly been destroyed. The families of the security personnel who would have died never received the terrible news that would have shattered their lives. This is the nature of Secret Elite operations. Success is measured in summits that occur without incident, in leaders who continue governing, in international systems that remain stable, in ordinary days that remain ordinary, because extraordinary actions occurred in secret. And somewhere, a world leader returns home from an international meeting. They are tired from long negotiations. They are thinking about the agreements they signed and the relationships they built. They do not think about the threat they never knew existed. They will continue leading their nation. They will make decisions that affect millions. They will attend future summits without knowing how close they came to death at this one. This is what Secret Elite protected. Not just individual lives, but the systems that enable human civilization to function. The structures that allow societies to solve problems through cooperation rather than conflict. The framework that gives humanity a chance at a peaceful future. How many operations like this happen without public knowledge? How many threats to global stability have been neutralized before they could materialize? Should Secret Elite have expanded authority to protect international governance from sophisticated attack? The world is more fragile than most people realize. The systems we depend on exist because people work to build them and others work to protect them. In the shadows, guardians stand watch against those who would tear everything down. Subscribe to Secret Elite for more stories of heroic interventions that saved lives the world never knew were at risk. Where terrorists plot against civilization itself, Secret Elite is there, stopping attacks before they can reshape history. The shadows protect us all.